Welcome to Beyond the Desk Admin Advocates, where we explore what it truly means to be an administrative professional in today's world. I'm Melissa Mahoney, CEO of the International Association of Administrative Professionals.
And I'm Rachel Suman, CXO of IAAP. We're not just leaders in this field. We're advocates, champions, and former admins ourselves.
That's right, Rachel. This podcast isn't your typical industry talk. We're here to bring you real conversations, real stories, and real solutions.
From AI to self-awareness journeys, we're here to discuss the deep issues that admins face every day, drawing from our own experiences and those of our community.
So whether you're a seasoned pro or just starting out on your administrative journey, join us as we explore the highs, the lows, and everything in between.
Get ready for authentic insights, candid conversations, and a whole lot of inspiration. This is Beyond the Desk Admin Advocates. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to part 2 of episode 6, also known as episode 7, where we left you hanging a little bit unintentionally, but we are here with 6 through 10 of the top 10 list of barriers to partnership. So let's go ahead and dive in and get started. So number 6, and I definitely recommend you can listen to this, but if you are able, go back and listen to episode 6 first and then pick up episode 7. It will make more sense. So number 6 is the paradigm of the role itself and how that can be a barrier to partnership. And I love this one because it really gets to kind of the underneath, the onion layer, if I may, of what your idea of an admin comes from, what your idea of an executive is, what your idea of leadership is. And on the flip side of that, what your executive's view of an administrative role is, what your executive's view of leadership is. And if those come from a place, well, not say a bad place, but maybe an inaccurate place. If those come from a place of subservience, if those come from a place of authoritarian, if any of those come from a place that is not partnership, that can be a real barrier. And that can show up in ways that aren't playing out in the most effective and efficient way. What do you think?
I totally agree. And I think if we want to talk real talk, Hollywood has not done the profession a great service. There are some exceptions to that. And I think even those exceptions are deeply flawed. So if you just think about how the role has been represented to society, it hasn't been represented very well, from Mad Men to even 9 to 5, which isn't necessarily, it was intended to be a comedy, it was intended to be a lighthearted view of the relationship. And at the time, it was not necessarily an inaccurate representation of a secretary's role in and of itself. But if you think about some of the things that it contributed to and or perhaps perpetuated that aren't necessarily good, and it wasn't a good example of true partnering, it wasn't a good example of a great leader with a great partner, that alignment didn't exist. So even the ones that are a little bit more endearing to us are flawed. Like the representations of those are flawed. So we're already up against this barrier around the paradigm of the profession to the folks outside of the role who don't know what it is and either have an outdated view based on what their grandmother or mother or aunt and these are all female positions because it was a female dominated role for so long. And that in and of itself has created some of the ideology that's wrapped around the profession. So knowing that those things already exist in the paradigm, and even though it feels like we're very far away from, those are ideologies that just keep existing in the ecosystem and in the culture. And while some big parts of them are shifting or changing, it still leaves behind a residue. So there's still some, to your point, there might still be some of those invisible barriers that aren't maybe in your face. Like it's not exactly like it was portrayed on Mad Men, or it was portrayed in other Hollywood portrayals of the
Mhm.
role. And there might still be some representation of that hierarchy,
Mhm.
this I'm the authority and you're here to serve. And FYI, servant leadership does not mean subservient.
Yes.
So you
Ooh.
can be a servant leader, you can have a servant leader mindset and heart
Mhm.
and not be subservient to anyone else.
Right.
That is two different things.
Right. Right.
So there are a lot of there's a lot of potential residue there that I think in this day and age where we are today, it's even trickier because it's under the surface. It's buried underneath. It might even just be like something that shows up in how you relate to or don't relate to
Mhm.
your executive you're supporting. It just might not be as in your face or direct as
Yeah.
it maybe once was.
Yeah, and the subtlety of it makes it even harder to address, I think. So to your point, it's in the water, but if it's not if it's not as obvious, then it's easier to excuse away. It's easier to say, "Oh, well that's just so and so," or "Oh, maybe I'm telling a different story," or maybe I'm misunderstanding. Like it still requires a very direct, we're going back to communication. We told you we were going to thread those throughout all of them, but it really does require communication, not only with your partner, whoever that is, but also with ourselves, right? Especially as administrative professionals. We talk about this a lot within the IAAP community, but recognizing that value that we bring, the contribution to business that we provide, and we're not just in anything, that is a pretty common phrase. We have to have that understanding within ourselves before we can then have a conversation with others about what that looks like. Because if we lack that confidence, if we lack that passion and that commitment and that understanding of what the role can and, dare I say, should be, then how can we expect anybody else to have it?
Totally agree. Yes. And I think that the big key here, because if you listen to the last episode, there's a flip side to this that is more positive. And I think the real key here, aside from communication, which is 100% key, is exploring your own paradigm of the role. And I think you need to unpack how you view the administrative profession
Mhm.
first. And there is another side of this where your leader's paradigm of the role is really important too, but do that self-examination first, because if you can really uncover some of the things that might be in your ecosystem that you didn't even know existed and really decide for yourself, this is how I envision the role, the profession, that this is how I am aligned to the role. This is why I believe I'm a great fit for it.
Mhm.
Here's how my strengths align, and here's how I envision being a player, a leader, a partner. That
Mhm.
makes the communication with your executive much more clear. You can be
Mhm.
much more direct about what it is that you're after, what you want out of the partnership. So I think that is a really positive part of this particular barrier. Is some of this is just your own self exploration that
Mhm.
doesn't require a difficult conversation with anyone. It might be a difficult conversation with yourself,
Yeah.
but at least
Yeah.
you can do it in the mirror at your leisure.
But it's still difficult, right? Like to your point,
Yeah.
we talk a lot about difficult conversations and we are layered, complicated human beings. So you have to get real honest with yourself in this one and that cannot be easy. So yeah, whether it's a mirror, whether it's a cup of coffee. We were talking about Hollywood and I'm thinking of all these movies with people who are like talking to themselves and it's a whole situation. But to your point though, we teach people how to treat us, and so this is an essential part of this that uncovers that barrier and may open doors that we didn't even know were closed.
So true. This
Yeah.
is a
Go ahead.
beautiful segue. And obviously, we created this list with a little intention in mind. But this idea of support versus caregiving is our number 7. It is a barrier that comes up quite frequently. And to be completely honest, most of the EAs and admins that we talk to don't even recognize
Mhm.
that they are slipping into a caregiving role versus a support role, or both. Uh, Oftentimes it's both. There's some support and some partnering happening, and also some caretaking, caregiving that's happening. So
Mhm.
I love this topic, and I don't want to get stuck too long on it because I know you and I could talk about this particular topic for a very long time.
A while.
So let's start with just defining what we mean when we
Mhm.
say support versus caretaking or caregiving. So I'll start and then, of course, add on, Rachel. So in my mind, I am viewing support as the support you're providing that is very much related to the goals, to the priorities of your organization, of the leaders you're supporting, the business objectives, the goals, how your work is directly supporting those outputs and outcomes and deliverables. That's what I mean when I say support. So we're talking about the task-oriented things, the mind, the leadership contributions you're making, the connections you're making, the relationships you're holding and building on behalf of those deliverables. Those are all, for me, things that qualify as support and partnering. On the caregiving and caretaking side, these are more of the personal assistance and or getting coffee, making sure that someone's dry cleaning is picked up and ready, making sure that the home schedule aligns with the work schedule, getting into some of those personal assistant lanes, being responsible for the emotional currency in the room. So are you asking your executive constantly, like, are you feeling okay? Do you have the energy for this? There is a fine line there, and it is a very slippery slope, a gray area. So that's really, especially when we're talking about emotional energy and emotional management, I think it's completely fine to do check-ins and to understand how someone operates and how their energy supports or does not support showing up in a meaningful way, understanding how that energy influences how they play. So maneuvering around different types of meetings based on where their energy levels are during the day is support. But feeling responsible and we're taking any sort of ownership over that energy and constantly having to check in on how they are feeling and taking some sort of responsibility for that, that's where you're slipping into, this is no longer support, you're moving into caretaking space. So I know there's more to embellish there. What are your thoughts on that?
No, you hit so many of the topics that I was thinking, and this is probably one of my favorites on this list because I think it also is a mindset. And that is true on both the administrative professional side and the executive side, because if you are going into an interaction with a caretaking mindset versus a support mindset from both sides, then there is a level of, to your point, the responsibility and the ownership that gets into a place that is not supporting the organization. So you said it so beautifully. I want to reiterate it just to make sure everybody hears it. Like, if your goal at the end of the day is supporting the goals of the organization, then you are on the right track. Like, yes, we as administrative professionals are here to support the executive, and it's in a partnership space. We are not caring for the person themselves. And that's really, I think, can be very difficult because admins by nature, most of the ones that I have met are very caring. They're very generous. They're very empathetic. Like, at their core, that is who they are. And that is not a bad thing. It's not a good bet. It's not a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It is. And you can use that to the support of the organization. And we're not saying that personality, like, yes, of course you have to work well with somebody, like that's a whole other episode that we will do at another time. And if you are going into, I like to use the example to put some meat on this if we can. If you are going into maybe putting together a trip for your executive, so your executive has been tasked with flying to this company and pitching a proposal to try and get them as new clients in your organization. So you, as the support professional, EA, whatever your title is, can partner from the beginning on that. You are going into it thinking, okay, we are pitching this proposal. So your executive is the one that is actually flying and giving this, but you can look at it from an experience perspective and say, okay, what does my executive need to be successful? So for travel purposes, they really need to get there the night before, so they are rested. I don't want them to have to be thinking about where to get a a ride from the airport so that they can really focus on that proposal. So I'm going to set this up for them. I'm going to write out an itinerary so it's all right there for them so that they can then focus 100% on the work that is delivering the proposal. You can do research for them, like this is who you're meeting with. These are the photos of the people that you're meeting with. This is the background of the organization that you are going to. So you can equip your executive to go in and say, you've got everything you need, put this proposal together, customize it, let them do what they do, and you do what you do in partnership to make that a beautiful success for the organization. And it does include some, like you have to plan travel, you have to create itineraries, like, but you're doing it from a place of support of the goal versus the support of whoever is flying there to go do that.
Yes. And I also like to caveat this by saying some executives are looking for personal assistance as
Yes.
part of the role. And I will say, hopefully we're getting some more executives who are listening to this, and I will shout this from the rooftops. If you are that executive that requires personal assistance as part of this role, you must define that very clearly
Yes.
when you hire for the role, because that should not be, it is not the standard, especially here in North America. I know this is different internationally. So I also will say, especially for our European folks, I think personal assistance is a little bit more normalized or standardized inside of some of the expectations of the role. But here in North America, it is absolutely not the standard. So if you are hiring for an EA or an admin or an assistant, and you do not clearly define that this role also requires some personal assistance and or caretaking, meaning any sort of personal errands, any sort of combined, if you have your personal life is combined somehow with your work life and your assistant is required to manage or maintain some aspect of your personal world, that is not the standard. So if that is a requirement of the job, and that's completely fair, if it is, you must be upfront about that. And to be honest, you need to expect to pay for it.
Yeah.
So that is not something that I'm sure it does
Swept
relate
in.
to, other duties as assigned does not count as being clear and direct in the job description. So, and if you are in a position and you have been hired for that role as a support partner and you're being asked to be a personal assistant or do some of the caretaking things, and that does not align with your expectations of the role, you have every right to call attention to that. That will become an even greater barrier to success, both for you and the company and the leader you're supporting, leaders that you're supporting. So call attention to it now, get ahead of it, get in front of it before it turns into something where it's being reflected poorly on your performance. And I know that would never be your intention or hope in any role or position. So I think the other big thing here is we're here to validate and affirm that it is not a standard expectation of the role. It maybe once was. Today, there is no place for that in business unless it is explicitly requested of you and going into it that this is part of the role. And you're aligned to that. You're completely in support of that is great.
Yeah.
And we would still advocate that you're really thoughtful about how those things are impacting the partnership or impacting the achievement of your goals. And if there are things there that are not contributing to the success of the organization, you can't draw the line. You can't see where me running this errand at this time is costing the company this much. I don't see the return. I can't connect this back to the return. I would be calling attention to that. I would be saying, is this really the best use of my time? Here's where I see a greater return on my time and the investment we're making as an organization and a company. So,
and there's a piece of this that I think bears saying, that we are talking about this as a pattern. So inevitably, especially if you have a long-standing partnership with your executive, I will speak to the admins in the room, if you will, but if they have a day where it's like back to back to back, and they're like, shoot, I've got this appointment, I have to move it. Like, we're not talking about that. Obviously, there are some times where you will jump in. You're like, I can make that call for you. I can move that meeting. That's not a work meeting. Like, that's not what we're talking about. We are talking about systematic, constant caretaking in those ways.
100% yes. Yes.
And I guess the positive is don't do it. No, just kidding. The positive is like the support I like to believe that we are all support professionals. So executives are support professionals, administrators are support professionals, engineers are support professionals. Like we all are. We are supporting the organization's goals from different aspects. And so if we can go into our roles viewing that as such, I think that just blows the lid wide open, if I may use that idiom, to see all of the opportunity and say, this is not caretaking. I'm not here to grab your laundry or whatever it is. We are here to further the goals and the mission of our organization. I think that will go a long way into removing barriers in this space.
Yeah. And it does connect directly back to that paradigm issue we were talking about in number 6, which is there's also this perception, the external perception of the profession that we're battling as well. So we're talking about a role that we are really trying to reintroduce to the business landscape as a true professional career choice. Getting out of that caretaking space will help us legitimize the role even more. So it's not to say that those things are bad or wrong, or you might even really find joy in doing those things. There are a lot of folks who find a lot of joy in the caretaking space. And we're really reaching a point with this profession where that is becoming a separate part of, so people are now getting personal assistance for their homes. That's really a more appropriate place for that work to take place, is not in the workplace where other people, other professionals in the workplace are watching the type of work that you're doing and the contributions you have, and are going to make judgments about it, whether we like it or not. That's the way that we work. We've talked about learner mindset and judger mindset. We tend to go to the judger place much more quickly than the learner path. So, and that is true for all of the professionals working inside of your office. So just be mindful of that too, with the caretaking versus partnering and support.
Yes, absolutely. Moving on to the next one. Gosh, I got to say, some really smart people put this list together because it just transitions beautifully into number 8, which is the separation of goals. We've been talking a lot about goals, and the barrier here is if the admin and the executive have 2 different goals, or have no knowledge of each other's goals. If you are an administrative professional working for an executive, with an executive, and if you were asked, do you know what your executive's goals are for the month, the quarter, the year, and you don't know, that is huge opportunity for a barrier, because you're off doing these things, your executive has this focus, and you can't truly partner together to achieve that work for the organization as a unit if you don't even know what it is or what they are.
Yes. And this is a fairly obvious one. And it's often a barrier from the executive's perspective, because sharing those goals feels a little personal and private. So
vulnerable.
It can be a really vulnerable space to play. So if you're partnering well right now, and you and your executive sit down and talk about those goals and talk about the overlap of your personal goals and how they support and or maybe aren't aligned, and do some work there to make sure that they are aligned, then you're in a fabulous space of partnering. That's the upside, the other side of this. But often it's just not part of the practice. We hold on to those goals, their personal goals. So we hold on to them, we covet them. It feels very vulnerable to share them out loud with other folks. So to imagine an executive sharing them with an admin or an assistant or an EA, that can be a barrier in and of itself, just the vulnerability that it takes to be in that shared thought space around goals. But once you reach that point, so I think from the admin's perspective, being really thoughtful about, I think empathetic is a good way to approach this combo. So understanding that it's not as easy as just, well, here they are, here are my goals, that it does require vulnerability, because it is a part of your performance as an employee of an organization. So there could be potentially a barrier there that exists that has nothing to do with the admin themselves. So you approaching this potential barrier from a position of empathy and understanding, I think is a great opportunity to reduce this barrier and really get to a space of shared goals, aligned goals, and even some greater, richer dialogue about how the work you are doing day in and day out. We were talking about return on investment, how the things that you are doing are in direct support of achievement of those goals. And then to a greater degree, it gives you an even better understanding of how your executive's goals tie into the organization's goals, the organization's mission, the organization's priorities. It allows you to get into that strategic space from a maybe more tactical lane, from these are your goals. How do they support the overall goals? Are they connected to the organization's goals? You can start to actually unpack some of those things from a strategic standpoint, which just makes the partnership richer.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to give a little shout out to someone in our community who was just on a panel with me, actually, Kimberly Roth. Woohoo! But I have heard her talk about her role as a productivity coach with her executive that she supports. And I loved that. That'll be a future episode. But she really talked about it from she is a productivity coach from the perspective of she knows what her executive needs to accomplish. She knows how that works. And then she can use her talents as support, organizer, all of the things that we know EAs are to help achieve those with him. It's a him for her, but without knowledge, she could not be that. And without that knowledge, none of us can be that. So I love your view of empathy in that. I 100% agree. And if you can showcase what's possible on the other side, like if we can get to a point of shared goals and shared accountability in these spaces, this is what is potentially possible for us, for the organization, then I think that can perk up ears a little bit more.
Yeah, great point. And we love Kimberly. Hey, Kimberly.
We do.
So moving on to, are we on number 9?
We are.
We're on number 9. 2 more to go. So number 9 is feedback, evaluation, and professional development. So I know that's a lot, but essentially it's all the same pie. We'll call it a pie. They're just different slices of the same pie. So when we talk about feedback, we're going to shout out to episode 5 where we talked about qualified feedback, because I think that is a very important distinction when we say feedback. Not all feedback is qualified feedback. There's some feedback that we get that we talked about this in episode 5. You may receive it. There might be something there for you to explore, but it's coming from a place of either unknown. It might be coming from a somebody who doesn't know you, and or there might not be a positive intent from that feedback. So you need to understand there are layers. It's a spectrum. Over here, we have the most qualified feedback, and over here we have the most unqualified feedback. And you're gonna have to find where the feedback lands on that spectrum for you. So you have those people in your world who you know are the most trustworthy. You have the most currency with those folks. And this is tricky too, because sometimes when we get into the space of having so much relational currency with someone, it prevents them from being honest with us because they care about our experience and our feelings. And you need to understand qualified feedback may not be coming from the person that you are the most close with. It might be coming from the people who you have deep relational currency with, but will still be truthful and honest with you and have some of those difficult conversations with you. That might be your most qualified feedback. You might have 1 or 2 people that fit into that space. And then the people online who are hiding behind anonymous names and are coming and throwing ridiculous shade at you online in a social media post, that's over here on the other end of the spectrum of unqualified feedback. They're just coming to hate, and haters going to hate. So we're going to put them over here in the unqualified feedback space. But there's this beautiful space in the middle where you're going to receive feedback from all different types of people and all different types of places, and you have to learn to filter that feedback appropriately. So what we're asking you to do in this space, and how it becomes a barrier for you between you and your executive, or executives that you are supporting is understanding where that feedback falls on that spectrum for you. Is your executive giving you qualified feedback? Oftentimes, unfortunately, especially in corporate environments, it's a telephone game. We're calling it feedback when actually it's Susie told Joe, who told Ben, who told Sally, who told your executive. And by the time the feedback, we'll call it feedback, by the time whatever it is gets to your executive and then they give it to you either in the form of an evaluation, which unfortunately often is how it shows up, is we sit on it and we pile it up. And then at the evaluation, we're like, here are all the things that I heard about you over the past 12 months. And here's all the things that we think you're doing wrong, instead of giving you qualified feedback in the moments where you need it so that you can adjust, you can receive, you can adjust, you can support in a different way, course correct, whatever you need to do, explore whatever needs to be explored. And unfortunately, we call some of that telephone game feedback. Well, that is not feedback. And an evaluation is not a regurgitation of all the things that you did wrong over the last 12 months. An evaluation is really a point in time where you are validating and affirming all of the feedback you've been giving over the last 12 months and saying, here's where I saw you took that feedback. And I saw that you really put that into practice. Here's how I witnessed that. How did you experience that? Here's a space where we talked about this feedback and I think there's still opportunity here for us to keep exploring what that looks like. That's when that is truly what an evaluation is intended to do. From a corporate culture, human resources culture, unfortunately, it really is designed to, and I'm trying to not speak in absolutes because this is definitely not true for our team, our culture, and it's not true for every team and every culture, but there is a fairly consistent, and again, this is a gross generalization, but there is a consistent challenge in the business ecosystem, especially in America, where we're using these structures and these systems simply to, what's the word I'm looking for? Document. It's a documentation system for human resources purposes. So we have this system or the structure around discipline and how we provide feedback and or evaluations and how that supports this merit system or this performance system. We have performance improvement plans, and all of those tools can be really useful for evaluating performance and supporting better performance, supporting better alignment, supporting a shift in the work you do, supporting all kinds of really great things for professional development. But when you use them for simply documentation purposes and we put it into this bucket of we're here supporting a structure and a system, not the people who are inside of it, that's where we have the breakdown and the barrier. And that's most frequently where we see this barrier shows up, is even when there is really great partnering, there's really good relationship currency between an admin and an executive. Sometimes the system doesn't support that partnering. And then you get stuck inside of the system of, well, this is how we give feedback in this culture. And this is what evaluations are in this culture. And HR says we have to do this way. And I'm, again, caveating this with HR isn't the enemy here. It feels like they're the villain in this story. They may not be supporting the partnering in the way that we hope that they are, but there's opportunity there. There's opportunity for us to challenge that system in a meaningful way, not in a conflicting way. So what I'm not advocating is that we march into HR and say, you're the reason that I can't partner with my executive because of your system and your structure. This is my experience. That's not what we're advocating for. And there's no villain if there's a villain in the story, it's certainly not any one department or one corporate culture. The villain in the story is a much bigger systemic villain that dates back to a whole nother 3 or 4 episodes of this podcast. However, it does speak to a very common barrier when it comes to feedback evaluation, and professional development we can gatekeep that as part of this structure or system. So when you ask for professional development and support of a plan that you've created that operates outside of this system that you're being stuck inside of, you're probably going to hear no's, or you're probably going to hear we have internal training. We have this structure to support these things. Your involvement in IAAP is outside of our internal support. Here's what we offer. So there are meaningful ways to challenge those systems. And some of the ways that we can do that is by tapping into the community, gaining access to these other cultures where it has been successful. We've been able to break down some of these barriers and see legitimate impact and ROI to business outcomes, which is really the key here, is we can actually directly show this has a positive impact on the bottom line.
Yeah, because we say this all the time, like we are all whole people. And so when somebody experiences what you beautifully talked about, because it's true, like I think I'm safe to say we all have had an experience in an evaluation that is very traumatic, if I may use that word intentionally, very punitive, very like you feel like it came out of nowhere. Like you're just working away, things are going well, and you get to your evaluation and you just get hit in the face with all of these like, nope, that is a very traumatic experience that can then impact all your future evaluations. Like can shut you down. Like we talk about quiet quitting, like all of these things that are happening in the world, a lot of them have to do with this particular issue and this barrier. So we're talking about admin executive partnership. I think it's much bigger than that. And I'll try and rein it back in because that's not what we're here for. But it really is like, this is a hugely impactful opportunity. If you were talking about feedback, like, are you even getting feedback? Like, how do you ask the best questions of either your admin or your executive, whoever's listening? Like, how do you ask for really great specific feedback? I'll point again to episode 5, but we talk a lot about you're doing great is not feedback. That's a compliment, and that's okay. But how do you say, how did this work for you? Did you have any challenges? How could we make this better? How could we make this more efficient? Like if you can get really specific in the questions that you ask to get to the feedback that you need to be your best self in this role, that's when you want to show up. That's when you want to show up. You want to do the meaningful work. You want to contribute to the work of the organization. But if you come and they're like, nope, you did this wrong, this is horrible, and you'd been doing it that way for 6 months, 8 months, and you're just now hearing that it's not working, that doesn't really inspire your best self or your best work. So I say that as a cautionary tale. That sounded really like a downer. I didn't mean it to, but it really is. I think we're showcasing how impactful this can be if we can remove those barriers, get to meaningful feedback, giving and receiving on both sides, utilize evaluations in the way that supports the whole person and supports their best work, and then support that with professional development that is specific, that is essential, that is broad and not only focused in this one area. That's why we exist. I feel
It's
like
a game changer. Yeah.
I'm on this like thing because it really is like, this one is a game changer. If we can really see business function in the way that we know it can. And it's not punitive, it's not authoritative, it's not all of some of the other things that we've talked about in this list.
Yes. And I will restate something you said earlier, which is we teach people how to treat us. That is also true in the feedback space. So we teach people how open we are to receiving feedback by asking the questions. So the more that you go to a team, to an executive, to whoever it is that you're trying to get feedback from and say, here are the questions I have for you. My intention was to do X. How do you think I delivered on my intention? That's an easy gateway for you to gain some really great feedback from folks. The more you do that, the more that you teach other people that not only are you open to the feedback, but you desire it. You want it. So again, here, you really can be the key, even inside of a system that isn't working or functioning properly, or may not be benefiting you. It may not be empowering. It may be doing all of those things that we've talked about. There's a really great opportunity for you to still get great feedback. That can also open the door to other people saying, I just watched that happen and I can see how they're applying that feedback. I'm going to give that a shot too. They may come to you, it may take a while, but they may come to you and say, I really appreciated you asking for that feedback. Can I ask you for the same favor in return? We have this meeting that you're going to be participating in. Here's my intention. I want to show up in this way for this meeting. Can you just be aware while we're in the meeting? Because I'd love your feedback at the end of the meeting. That can actually promote a culture shift without having to fight a system that, again, is probably more systemic than you even know.
Yeah.
It might even be rooted in places that you can't, it's not tangible to you. So I think that's a very tangible thing that you can participate in yourself.
Yes. Yes. And subversive in the best ways. We don't normally hear that word in a positive
Right.
way, but it really is. And you have to be ready for it. So before we move on to the next one, like if you're asking for the feedback, like you have to
Receive
hear
it.
it, receive it. You have to receive it. You have to give it, like see episode 5 for all of the things, but that's really where the game-changing aspects of this that we're talking about come in.
Yeah. And I also, for anything that's related to feedback or evaluations, Danielle Adams Wiltshire comes to mind every time with the Q-tip, which is a game-changing acronym, but quit taking it personally.
Yes.
So I'm telling you, like the Q-tip is something that sticks in my mind constantly, because
Not
it's
literally, thank goodness.
not literally, yeah. But it can be a game changer when you're receiving feedback that might feel very personal. Just remember the Q-tip and receive the feedback. If you can get past that initial reaction and response and really receive it and process it, that doesn't have to happen in real time either. It doesn't have, you can receive the feedback, say thank you, move on, and go do the work that you need to do on that feedback in a safer space.
Yep.
That is complete. That's what most of us do, even those of us who are receiving and giving feedback constantly. Some of that stuff has to happen
Mm-hmm.
personally in private, and that is completely fair.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I can just see people carrying Q-tips everywhere.
Q-tips.
Like, let's start a movement, y'all.
Yep.
You could just carry them around and dole them out to people and yourself when you need it.
I love it.
Last but not least, number 10, and
This is a big one.
this is a big one, and it's an essential conversation. So this one is compensation and the barrier in compensation. And when we say the barrier, pay discrepancy is, I think, the best way to say this, but are you fairly compensated for the work that you are doing? And when we say fair is also a really sticky word, I think, because fair can mean different things to different of us. And are you compensated comparably to your executive that makes sense given the roles, the responsibilities, the liabilities that each of you cover? And if not, how do you have that conversation? And Mel, I'm going to let you talk about this so brilliantly, but it's a heavy topic.
Very heavy. That's why this is number 10 on our list, y'all, because this is a big one. And this is probably the trickiest barrier to uncover, because we are quite literally talking about pay disparity with the person who probably makes the decisions about your compensation. And it's hard to talk about this without pointing to your executive's compensation, which again is a vulnerable space and usually a space that is off limits in many cultures. So I just want to caveat before we get into the specifics of this. Our philosophy around compensation, and not just compensation, but equitable compensation, does not reflect society today. So when we talk about this, I just want to acknowledge this is very likely far away, or might feel very far away for a lot of you who are working in cultures where the pay gap between an executive, a C-suite executive, and not just an admin, but the lower level, lower compensated employees in an
Frontline
organization,
workers.
the gap is so wide that it's almost immeasurable. Like that is a fairly common occurrence inside of organizations, both big and small. And so that is not our experience as C-suite executives on our team. And that's not just because we are a nonprofit. That is also because we don't believe that is an equitable experience for anyone. I just saw it was a video montage, and I can't even remember where I saw it, probably LinkedIn, but it was a couple of executives who are nearing retirement age. They own their own company and they have run their company by a rule, and I'm going to misquote it because I can't remember exactly what they called it, but essentially it was the times 7 rule.
Yeah.
So they were living by the hour compensation benefit plan, like all of that. We will never exceed 7 times the amount of our lowest paid employee.
Oh.
And lowest paid employee means their entire benefit package.
Mhm.
So they wrapped everything in that. So their fringe benefits, their all of their compensation could not be 7 times more, would not be 7 times more than their lowest paid employee. And I thought that was brilliant.
Oh, beautiful.
Arbitrary number. It obviously made sense to them
Yeah.
because it
Yeah.
worked inside of their model, but the philosophy behind it, I was very much interested in because it aligns to our
Mhm.
philosophy around equity and contribution.
Yes.
So the pay gap, there is no person on this planet, I don't believe, this is me, it's my talk, but there's no person on this planet that is worth 250 times more than any other one person by contribution. I don't care if you built a business. I don't care if it's your intellectual property. When we're talking about that pay equity and that pay gap, like CEOs making 500 times more than their frontline employees who are quite literally making it possible for them to have the salary they have. Like, I'm not aligned to that. I don't think that there's a place for that in an inclusive
Mhm.
society. And the reality is a lot of us are living inside of that type of work culture.
Yeah.
So that's why we put this on the list,
Yeah.
because it is a huge barrier. And even if it's only 50 times more that your executive is getting paid than you, that is astronomical.
Yeah.
And I really have a problem. I have an issue with the folks who are like, well, the executive is the one who is generating the revenue. They're the one who is
Mhm.
taking all of the liability and risk on behalf of the organization. They're the ones who have all of the responsibility. Well, no, it's shared.
Yeah.
It is shared among all of the people who are executing on behalf of the organization.
Mhm.
So yes, there is, from a contribution standpoint, there is a higher degree of accountability, a higher degree of risk,
Yeah.
a higher degree of liability. But are you telling me it is 100 times more,
Yeah.
especially when we're talking about the person you're partnering with to make these things happen, the person who knows all the secrets, the person who's taking just as much risk day in and day out, if not sometimes more risk, because oftentimes the EA is holding on to some of these knowledge, the things, the intellectual property of an organization
Mhm.
without some of the ownership of outcomes. So
Mhm.
there's some inherent risk involved with that is different than the risk of the executive. So
Mhm.
we are very much approaching this conversation hoping that there is a day coming where we can close this gap and really start to poke at this idea that an executive is worth
Yeah.
100 times more than the admin or any other team member who is supporting, that any executive is worth that much more than the people who are actually executing on the things that keep the business running.
Yeah.
I don't know how anyone, I really don't. The greatest argument that we hear constantly is that, well, we're producing revenue. Well, how much more revenue are you producing because you have a kick-ass EA who's giving you more capacity and giving you more time to collect more revenue or drum up more business or have more client meetings or whatever the business is, you're able to operate at a much higher capacity. That is a direct impact on the bottom line. So you deserve a cut of whatever that capacity is, and you can measure that. There's a very black and white mathematical way that you can measure that inside of every organization. And I don't think that gets at the real heart of the problem. So I
Mhm.
think there's value in doing that calculation. I think you need to know
Mhm.
as an admin, roughly, I'm adding X amount of hours
Mhm.
of capacity to my executive. Figure out what that is. Your executive has an hourly rate.
Mhm.
You don't even have to know what it is to say, I've added 15 hours to your week.
Yeah.
Take that 15 hours times your hourly salary and tell me, or your hourly pay, and tell me how much that is worth to you.
Yeah.
You don't even have to know how much they make to come up with the calculation.
Mhm.
That's only part of the issue, though.
Yeah.
The other part of the issue is philosophy. Like,
Mhm.
the real value statement here is, do you actually value the time, the labor, the people who are supporting the success of this business? Do
Mhm.
you value those human beings
Mhm.
who are just as they are equally, they have just as much right to earn a dignified living doing the work that they're doing. And
Mhm.
that work is no less dignified than the work of an executive.
Right.
Again, we understand that this is not the paradigm that everyone is living in, but that's why it's such a big barrier.
It is. And we're not, you can tell that we are very passionate about it. So we are not advocating you to go into your exec's office and be like, you make too much money. And that's not going to help the
Probably not going to be a fruitful conversation.
No, it
Don't
is
do
not.
that.
And these are conversations that you can happen, that can happen, that may move the work forward. Because if you are feeling like that as the partner to this executive, I guarantee there are others in the organization who are feeling that way, and who it is a barrier not only to partnership, but to doing the work that they are being paid to do. So you also, I think, administrative professionals, especially ones that have a great partnership, are in a very unique position to maybe say some things that can be a little harder to hear. Again, not you make too much money, but I've done this math, I've done this research, and this is what I am contributing to the bottom line. This is what the frontline worker down the hall is contributing to the bottom line. And how can we as an organization better support that structure to ensure that everybody who works here doesn't have to question their value? They don't have to question whether they can make an honest day's living and actually survive on their salary. Like, those are opportunities that you can have, whether your executive is directly contributing to that, or maybe on a leadership team, that those conversations can be discussed. And again, this is the last one because this is sticky. Whenever you talk about money, it is a sticky conversation. So we are not saying it is easy, and we are saying it is essential to partnership and to great business to just even be aware. Do some research. Like, if this is a new conversation to you, dive in briefly into these areas and do a little bit more searching on organizations like you mentioned with the 7 times. Organizations like, I don't want to call any organizations out, organizations that don't align to that philosophy, let's say, and be able to put that information together so that you can have the conversations when or if they come up in a way that is supportive of the goal and mission of the organization and the people that work there.
Absolutely, yes. And to your point, there's some paradigm exploration here too. So a lot of us carry those experiences that we've had with executives who probably earn an exorbitant amount of money to us. We view it as an excessive amount of money, and they maybe do not approach that from a place of reverence and respect or value of their employees, their teams, how
Mhm.
work gets done. We carry those experiences with us. So that can even become a barrier when you encounter something that's really great, or
Mhm.
someone who is more open, someone who does have value. Don't let that barrier, don't let that past experience become a barrier in a role where you actually do have an opportunity to explore that with an executive,
Mhm.
simply because you've got that paradigm running that all executives make excessive amounts of money and all CEOs are XYZ, or C-suite executives are. If you've got some of those definitions based on probably really valid experiences,
Yeah.
it has shown up even for us that we walk into rooms all the time where people assume, because of our title alone, that we're living this extravagant lifestyle. And even when we say we're nonprofit CEOs, because newsflash, there are plenty of nonprofit CEOs out there who are living extravagant lifestyles because of their salaries. We are not those executives. And yet we often get treated as though we are because there's an assumption being made based on previous experiences. So don't allow that to be a barrier. Don't assume that you already know the answers to these questions, or you already know that an executive is not open to it until you've actually confirmed that you're working inside of a culture that does not support pay equity and is not prepared to have these conversations and is not even interested in the pay gap and minding that gap a bit. Because I will say this, we know that it's possible. We're working inside of a team culture that it's not the times 7 rule. We don't have we haven't defined the rule to that extent, but we have defined a compensation philosophy for both our team and for the person who's sitting in this seat. And they must always be aligned. And we are looking at we're looking at pay gaps and pay equity from a space of ensuring that it does not become an issue, that there's a real tangible connection to why people are paid what they're paid. And we have structure and system and process in place that makes real sense with, especially because as a nonprofit, we are constantly reinvesting this money into the future of the profession. So the people who are serving you in this capacity, you need to be assured that we are spending this money wisely and that we're building capacity on this team in a fair and equitable way. I can promise you, while I'm sitting in this seat, that will be true for IAAP. That's not true everywhere, and we get that, but we know we're not the only ones. We've talked to many other people who are on this journey, a similar journey of creating. The video I referenced is one of many people out there. And those are for-profit companies. Those are entrepreneurs who are starting their own businesses, who are committing to creating these cultures of real value and wholeness and inclusiveness and understanding that everybody's work is dignified and should be compensated. We all deserve to earn a living wage. That exists, and I'm promising you that talent is going to follow that culture.
Yes.
We are experiencing that with our team. Now we have people who are asking us how to get on this team because they are witnessing what it looks like when you have a team that is aligned to mission, that is supportive of one another, that sees one another, that values each other. They don't even know. They don't know the ins and outs of what we get paid or any of that. They just want in on the culture. I promise you talent will follow that culture. So if you're stuck in a place where this conversation is so far out of you're never going to get here, it's so far out of bounds, there are other places to look. So even if we can give you some hope and some validation that you are worth it, and that it is 100% valid for you to be considering finding a workplace that will value your contributions in a meaningful way and will see you as a whole person, everybody deserves that in a workplace.
Yes.
It is possible.
Absolutely. And it doesn't happen in a day. So we've said this in other ones, and I think it bears repeating, like this is a big deal. And so if there's openness, if there's curiosity, if there's like, you can't just change a philosophy like that, especially in a big organization. Like we recognize it takes time. So like lean into that, recognize the wins and see the progress in the journey. And I think honor that openness and curiosity. If you don't experience it, yes, what Mel said, but if you do experience it, if you can stick with it and make the change within the organization, that is still a huge win. And the more we can do that within organizations, the more the system starts to change overall.
I agree. Yes.
So that was 10. We did
it. 10.
And we want to give you a little sneak peek of the next episode 8. I'm actually going to let you do it because I'm so excited about it. I'll like shrill it.
Yes. So we were talking about this episode, and for those of you who were with us at Summit, either virtually or in person in New York, we're recording this particular episode not even a week out from Summit. So if we are a little bit off today, that is why we're in recovery mode. We're about to head into a recovery day.
Thank you for your
The
grace.
team, yes, the team is heading into a recovery day. So we didn't want to use today's episode to do this because we want to be really thoughtful about how we build out this next episode. But we do want to give you a beautiful Summit 2024 recap. We know a lot of people in our community were not able to attend, and we know that because only 1,200 people attended, and we have 100,000 people in our overall community. So we definitely want to provide you all with some highlights, some midlights, and I don't know that we had any lowlights necessarily. So, but some lessons.
Only
I
the
think we
ones on
always,
stage that were essential for
yeah,
leading. So
right. But we always have lessons learned. So there were some really great takeaways that we just love to share with you all and hopefully give everyone a little taste of what happened at Summit. There were some really great things that came up even in community conversation that I would love Rachel and I can unpack a little bit further for our community and hopefully give you some insight into the phenomenal experience and spoiler alert, convince you to come to Chicago in 2025
we
and
would
be
love
with
to
us.
see you there. Yes.
Yes. So
So,
stay tuned for episode 8, Summit
yes,
Recap.
you will not want to miss it for sure.
Yes.
Thank you for joining us for this episode, though. It was so good. Hopefully, these 10 barriers and the potentials on the other side gave some insight and gave some opportunity for conversations. And let us know. As always, we ask this all the time, but we want to hear from you. Like if this sparked a conversation with your executive, if you're an executive and you're like, I want to know more, reach out to us. We would love to hear from you and have those conversations.
Absolutely. Thanks, y'all.
We'll see you soon.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of Beyond the Desk Admin Advocates. We hope you enjoyed diving deep into the world of admins with us.
Remember, this podcast isn't just about listening, it's about taking action. Whether it's advocating for yourself in the workplace or supporting your fellow admins, let's continue to elevate this profession together. If you have any thoughts, questions, or topics you'd like us to explore in future episodes, don't hesitate to reach out to us on social media or through our website.
Until next time, keep pushing beyond the desk. And remember, change begins with you. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.